So hello everybody, and thank you for joining today's presentation. Apologies in the technical difficulties as we were getting started here. Welcome everyone to 2021. If your New Year's resolution is to live a more green life and be more sustainable, you're in the right place. We've got a great presentation today. We also have a number of resources for you. So in the chat, I've already typed in some URLs there. One is for where you can view all of the recordings of our previous Lunchtime Learning webinar series, and another one is for the new Green Home Tips section of the Green New York website. And that's got links and resources and other things to where you can find all sorts of things to help you live a more green life. A couple housekeeping notes before we get started with the presentation today. Everyone is on mute when you join, so if you have a question or anything else, make sure to type it into the chat box. As we go along, just type your questions into the chat box, and then we'll get to them at the end. We'll have Jody answer them there. This meeting also is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Green New York website afterwards. So if you missed something, you want to go back and see it, or if you want to share it with a colleague that couldn't make it, you can go right there on the Green New York website and find that in a couple days. And again, the link to that is right in the chat box there. Our next edition of the Lunchtime Learning webinar series is going to be taking place on Tuesday, February 19th. It's going to be on sustainable brewing. And with that, we're going to get into today's topic, which is avoiding misleading green claims with Jody Smits-Anderson from DASNY. And it's perfect. I actually have an example for you to kick this off.
Great.
The other day, I bought a bidet, and right on it, like right on the actual unit itself, it says environmentally friendly. And I was thinking to myself, how? Like what is environmentally friendly about this? It literally says just environmentally friendly. And I was like, is that using it as environmentally friendly? Is it environmentally friendly compared to other bidets? Is it environmentally friendly because it is what it is? I mean, I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. So I'll kind of lead you off with that and take it away.
That's a great example, in fact. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm Jody Smits-Anderson. I want to be clear that I am not an expert about procurement and avoiding misleading green claims, although I do have some experience with it and some ability to tell you some stories that might inform your work. What's interesting is that, it's really a constant awareness battle, and maybe battle is the wrong word. People are learning, and there are some people that are malicious about avoiding change. There are some people who are lazy about avoiding change, and there are some people who just don't know any better. And I think all three of those aspects are part of what we're seeing in kind of green claims that are inaccurate. I'm trying very hard not to use a term, but I'll probably say greenwashing at some point, like now. So what we're talking about is, in some cases, like I said, it's intentional. And when it's intentional, that's an even harder thing to touch on. The 7 sins of greenwashing that I'm using as the basis for this presentation, they were developed, and I can't tell if it was from EcoWatch or for UL. Both of those organizations have used these terms consistently and used this information to train their staff. And it has become prevalent in the industry when we're talking about procurement to pay attention to these 7 sins. So we're going to go through them. Again, I see that these are parsed out very specifically, and maybe the specificity isn't the point. Maybe the specificity is just to have some things repeated so you get in the habit of knowing that some people fib and some people are making mistakes. So we're going to talk about some of these things. So the most obvious thing is that some people just lie. I mean, it's an evil world out there, even though I'm a very happy person and try and look on the good side and trust people. I can get taken in by people who are just fibbing. There are products that have, claims like they're Energy Star certified or they're registered, and you can really only fight that by going to the referenced database and saying, hey, is this product really there? Is this service doing what it says it's going to do? So look out for fibbing. We have found a lot of examples. I'll tell a couple of stories as we go. Some of it, when it's this intentional, it really is just a flat out lie. And you'd think that it would be easy to spot those lies, but sometimes we're just so eager to find the product that is greener, we swallow it all hook, line, and sinker. I think that's the lesson when it comes to lies. You really just always have to verify things until you get comfortable with the manufacturer's reputation, until you know that they have always proven out to be accurate. You do have to check the sources. Here's another one. Maybe no one will look. So an example is maybe toilet tissue or facial tissue that say they have a certain percentage of post-consumer recycled content, and they don't actually back that up with any data. So you really can look for the data to support the claims. I would say that another thing is just an awareness that this is a nuance for no proof. They might say they have recycled content, and this gets into some other of the sins later. They might say they have recycled content, but not be clear about whether it's post-consumer or pre-consumer. So that's a little bit of vagueness, but it's also no proof. They haven't told you how much is post-consumer. Now, the reason post-consumer is more important is because it means that the product is designed to go through an entire system of manufacture and use and then come back to be recycled, and that's awesome. Pre-consumer is also really valuable. There are manufacturing processes that have changed dramatically over the years to make sure that the waste from the product manufacturing line is reduced. So we do like to see any kind of recycled content, but we really do want to know what's pre-consumer and what's post-consumer. Pre-consumer means that the industry is cleaning up, and that's awesome. Post-consumer means we're starting to pay attention to the bigger product cycles in manufacturing as a whole, and that's vitally important long-term. All right, so we're going to get into, I kind of mentioned vagueness, and I think that this is what Brendan was pointing out. All natural is a great example. It's not necessarily green, and the example in the 7 sins is, arsenic and uranium and mercury are all naturally occurring and they're poisonous. Formaldehyde is something that we have worked very hard to get out of the building industry. 20 years ago, the U.S. Green Building Council and the LEED rating system was one of the first to say no added urea formaldehyde in products, because adding that creates toxic levels and increases VOC issues within buildings. It's a totally naturally occurring element that really we just can't amplify that. So in Brendan, in your example, you mentioned, good for the environment as a label on the bidet. No certification, no proof of what that concept meant, totally vague. Yeah, that sounds great, but what exactly does it mean? Does it relate to the fact that with a bidet you're not using as much toilet paper? What does that really have to do with the bidet? Is it an efficient bidet and performing better than other bidets? We don't know. Was it manufactured locally? What does any of that mean? So vagueness is a big concern. A prime example of this also is just the confusion of labels creates vagueness. And the best example is, a carton of eggs. What's the difference between all natural, cage-free, organic, free range, all of these terms, and then add in local on top of it? What do these terms really mean and what's important? And we'll get into that in a minute about what's important as an assistance in defining these 7 or avoiding these 7 sins. So there's an implication too. It's not as egregious as a flat out lie, but a false label or an implication is also a lie. So if you look at the labels, and I would say an example is, environmentally, this is an environmental product or a positive environmental choice, without really understanding what is meant by that means that they're just kind of trying to get away with a label in order to make their product look good, and it's false. The only way to really ensure the validity of a claim is to actually go to that third-party endorsement. And if you can't find that third-party endorsement, then that is absolutely a false label. One of the things, let's say implication, here's an example of implication. You might have heard the term, and this is related to buildings because that's where I live, is in the design of greener buildings and also the policy related to that. When people say, oh, this project is LEED certifiable or LEED Gold certifiable, or it's designed to the LEED standard, all of those are implications that are just flat out lies, because the LEED rating system is only completed and an actual third-party certification when the paperwork has been submitted and reviewers have looked at that content to ensure the validity and the performance levels. So by calling out the term LEED when that process hasn't been completed, that is an implication that is a lie. And that's one of the things that's tough in policy work, because we tend to use language like LEED certifiable when we don't want to scare people with requiring an actual third-party endorsement. But there's not really a benefit to that for the consumers or for our achievement goals. Irrelevance. This is one of my favorite things. True. Things can be true. Absolute truth is wonderful, but it's really, what's the point? CFC-free is true, but those chlorofluorocarbons have been banned under the Montreal Protocol since, 1990? So that's one thing that, what does it matter? Why are we labeling that anymore? Zero trans fat. In New York State, trans fat is not allowed above a certain level in snack foods. So claiming zero trans fat is absolutely irrelevant. It's also, in my mind, quite inaccurate, because there's really no such thing as zero trans fat. That label indicates the presence of trans fat under a certain milligram count. So that's even kind of a misdirection in that, an inaccuracy. So look for, and this is where I want to get in a little deeper, look for the true aspects that are actually important to what you're doing. And this is why sustainability is such a big hairy mess sometimes, because the ultimate in sustainability is getting to the point when everything that we do will actually clean the water that we use to do it, will produce energy greater than the energy we use, there's an ideal realm, will eliminate toxins entirely, etc. At this point in time, we have to define what's relevant to the work that we're doing. So if we're, the example that I often use is if we're building a building, and again, I'll use a building example, but I'll get back into products in a minute. If we're building a building in a community, and that community is really focused on building its local economy, we have to build our sustainability goals around that goal, around that local economy. And in that case, it might be that for the products we're using in the building, we're not focusing as hard on toxins. We're saying, yes, this floor tile has some things that we're slightly concerned about. However, it's going to bolster our local economy. And that thought process is a valid part of avoiding greenwashing. I would make other choices. You would make other choices. But we have to work to define what's important to the purchasing choice at hand and the project at hand in order to make the right relevant choices in our purchase. For another example of that is what's a good example? Purchasing paper plates especially with our concerns now over the PFOA and PFAS, which often are components in strengthening paper plates. We can buy paper plates that don't have that content, and we have to be aware of the strength of that paper plate and make sure we can make that work in our current situation. So we have to have the conversations. That was a very bad example because it sounds like I'm encouraging toxins, and that's not in any way what I'm trying to do. I'm just saying we need to be aware. So here's one that makes me kind of laugh, the lesser of two evils, organic cigarettes or fuel-efficient SUVs. I'm in some discussions about, how to plan our transportation future, and there's a lot of focus on, we just need to get everyone into an electric vehicle. We just need to we need to make sure that we're building our systems for autonomous vehicles, as if those are the actual answer. That is, when you look at the system needs, getting people out of single occupancy vehicles is the real focus. So the lesser of two evils is certainly getting everyone into an electric vehicle, but the environmental burden of creating batteries, creating all those individual vehicles, creating the infrastructure in a community to move those vehicles around, all of those are pretty burdensome. As part of the solution, yes, we need to get people out of their gas guzzling cars into electric vehicles, and they will learn some different driving styles from being in those electric vehicles. So that's a wonderful thing. Ideally, what are we looking for? And let's always keep that in mind. Probably organic cigarettes, not exactly solving your problem. Better choice than tar-laden, toxic-laden cigarettes? I would say yes. And then there's the hidden trade-off. This is another really fine nuance that I struggle with. Paper is not necessarily preferable when it comes from a sustainably harvested forest. It can be. In our specification in New York State, paper is defined as 100% recycled content paper, non-chlorine bleach processed. So which is more important, the non-chlorine bleach processed or the 100% recycled, or the validity of the labor practices in the company that's producing that paper? And this is where you really need to define, what different considerations are important and the relative weight of those considerations. There's a long-standing discussion about FSC lumber, which is Forest Stewardship Council lumber, which ensures good lumber practices, management of forests, that the lumber is tracked from where it is cut through all of the mills that touch it, through the distribution. And a lot of people say that that's an awful lot of effort to make sure it's FSC lumber. And should we be using lumber anyway? I think the answer is, look for the most nature-tied item that needs the least processing. So lumber is definitely there. And then find a system that tries to touch on all of the aspects of creation of that material, not just focusing on one. The Ford Motor Company, this will sound like not a related term, but the Ford Motor Company, for example, made a big mistake, in my opinion, in that they greened up their business first and didn't green up their cars for quite a long time. So they had the biggest green roof in the world for quite a long time, and they provided skylights throughout their building for all of their workers and made a much more beneficial work environment. These are all exceptionally good things, but it didn't help them with their business focus, and it didn't get their name out there for producing green products. Of course, they're already hamstrung, building cars. but where is the trade-off? Is the practices of the company, are the practices of the company important, or is the product itself important, or a mix of both or all? I'm a big and all kind of person. So those are the 7 listed sins. I want to tell a couple of stories related to green procurement in New York State. One of the things that I struggled with a couple of years ago, and I'm wondering where this would fit. I probably should have talked about it in one of the things. Actually, I'll put it under vagueness. So I went to buy paper, or went to track all of our paper purchases at DASNY, and I found some paper listed that I hadn't encountered before. I don't know which company it was from. I'm not going to get into which company, but I went to the catalog and online, and I looked at the catalog listing, and it wasn't really clear about the recycled content. I mean, I had to report if I had achieved 100% recycled content, non-chlorine processed. But there was a little green leaf on the catalog page for this product. The description didn't make sense to me, so I called and said, I need somebody to tell me if this is 100% recycled content and if it's non-chlorine processed. I'm confused because there's a little green leaf and I don't know really what's going on. And we bought this paper. So they didn't know, and they said they'd get back to me in a little while, and 3 or 4 days later I got a call back, and the answer was that paper was 100% virgin content paper, and it was chlorine bleach processed. The box that it was in was 100% recycled. And that is what I had to report then to, Green New York, that we did not purchase paper that met the specifications. I think additionally, my calling put a flag up for them. And I think that's the other thing we need to do in addressing greenwashing sins is we need to call the manufacturers on this and say, hey, what's the deal? Where's the proof? Show me what's going on. Oh, and by the way, you might think that this description is clear or that this green leaf is benefiting people out there, but what it's doing is creating confusion, and quite frankly, it's a lie. So that's one example. Another example that I think we're dealing with all over the place now, and plastics have become a really big concern. And hopefully you're all, paying attention to plastics, trying to reduce your plastic purchases. I honestly believe plastics are incredibly valuable for the things that they need to be used for. And they don't need to be used for single-use anything, except for blood bags, maybe. I think we have other options for straws, certainly, and other things. So anyway, talking about plastics, the thing that's going on now, and let me see if I think it's more of a confusion factor. So let me see if I can find the right slide to look at. I'd say maybe irrelevance. Okay, so we're talking about plastic, and one of the things that's out there now is there are 2 aspects to this. One of it is irrelevance. There's plastic that's labeled compostable plastic. All right, so I find that to be irrelevant because even if it's entirely 100% true, the systems that we have in place and the awareness of the people at large does not get those compostable plastic elements into composting facilities. So what happens is that compostable plastic goes into our normal plastic recycling, best case scenario, which is a horrible scenario because it undermines the quality of plastics recycling. So we've let the market create a situation that is actually undermining the already poorly performing recycling systems for plastic that exist. On top of that, this is probably, I'm not even going to say, maybe a hidden trade-off. What we're talking about is, and I'm just going to go back to the home screen because this is too confusing. What we're talking about is compostable plastic, which in most cases, and I'm going to say I've only found maybe one time when it's been an accurate description. Most compostable plastics are only compostable in an industrial composter, which means that they have to have heat applied to them. In the normal backyard composting pile that's behind a house or behind a smaller commercial facility or on a college campus, the heat generated is not enough to compost that compostable plastic. It has to be put into a system that has an energy input to raise the temperature. So therefore, to me, that's a lie or a fib. And on top of it, it's creating all of those problems with our recycling systems on top of that. All right, so I'm going to go to kind of an end screen here, which if it'll let me. So just as a summary point, and then we'll open it to discussion, I encourage you, first of all, to put any of the things that you've encountered as far as greenwashing into the chat function, because I think that the only way we can learn as a state is by sharing what we've experienced and saying, hey, look out for this, look out for that, or hey, I saw this and I addressed it this way. I'm just laying the cards on the table so we can start the conversation. In summary, it happens. There are lies, there are misdirections, there's just laziness where people don't know any better. It's a tough world out there, and as far as marketing goes, whenever you can say something that catches someone's eye, it's a beneficial thing. It's like there's no news coverage that's bad for publicity. I would say that that part of that is also a fear. The people who are good actors, like who really want to showcase the good green work they've done, often get caught in a feeling that they're going to be labeled as a greenwasher for saying, hey, we've done, at DASB, we've done, I forget what the number is, we have 46 LEED rated projects, and we have another 48 that are in the LEED system. Somebody could say, wow, you only have 47 or 40, whatever, LEED rated projects, and how long have you been in business, and how many projects, this looks good, but is it really good compared to everything you've done? So we have to be clear that this is a process and that we're working toward greener goals, and we have to share all of our successes without saying anything about the work being done. The work is never done. So I think that's really important. We have to be humble and celebratory at the same time. And when we see lies, misdirections, and lazy claims, we have to up our own game. We have to trust and verify. Classic, wonderful approach. Build on the reputations that you know are solid. Verify ones that you don't. Publicize what you've verified and share it with your colleagues across all of the state agencies. We have a powerhouse of staff, and the individual work that I do or the individual work that Brendan's doing or any of you is going to pale in comparison to what we can do when we work together on it. So ask for and share backup. Define what's important. When you're buying something, what's important to you? If your agency is the Department of Health, you will likely be focused on health outcomes a little more stringently than maybe NYSERDA, who's focused more on energy. And that's okay, because as we build this awareness and build these improvements focused on our own project concerns, we will amplify those across the board and eventually get to a point where we can meet all of those things at the same time. Tell vendors what is important. That's the last message I have. It takes a lot to pick up a phone and call a vendor. It really does. Even if you can manage to do it once each reporting cycle, like you report to Green New York once a year, pick up that phone and talk to one of your vendors and say, look, I need better information from you on this. Or I realize the information you shared with me on this is not accurate. Where can I get accurate information? It's the same thing with contracts and working, for example, with a waste hauler. If you have a chance to reach out to them and say, this is the reporting I need to do, what can you do to help me with reporting? They will start to also reposition their own services in order to make that happen. So this is what the iterative process is. It's always ever improving. All right, I'm going to pull up the chat and share a couple of things that have come up. Let's see, links. Jody, could I elaborate further on why our plastics recycling systems are poorly performing? I don't think we have enough time to go into great depth, but thanks for the question, Joyce. They're poorly performing because plastics, there are a couple layers to this. Plastics can never be recycled at the same performance level of original plastics. So we inherently have a system that's decycling plastics. So that's one thing. The second thing, we have all of the plastic numbers on our plastics. Those numbers just indicate what type of plastic it is. It doesn't indicate out of the gate if it's recyclable or not. So it depends on which community you live in, what is actually recyclable and what is not. But most of us don't know that. It's a very intensive, individual person-focused system. On top of that, we've complicated it by adding the compostable plastics, which further degrade our systems and are truly not compostable in more cases. On top of that, we've had debates with China and issues with China with tariffs. They have refused plastics for recycling, and we have never developed comprehensive or complete recycling systems within the United States. We don't process our own waste here at a level we should. So that's a summary. Hope that helps. Michael, laundry detergent that is phosphorus-free on a label, but is a New York State laundry detergent. Oh, it has to be phosphorus-free. Okay, so it's labeled as phosphorus-free, but is not actually phosphorus-free. Good point. Small pieces, yes, we're talking about plastic still. When plastic breaks down, it breaks into microplastics. What's left is still plastic. Even if there's leaching of some of the chemicals in plastic, it never actually degrades. The small pieces will exist and be a problem in a lot of systems, water systems, soil systems, and also food systems. So that's incredible. Are there companies whose green claims are more truthful than others? I would say yes, but I can't rattle them off for you. I would encourage you to look at companies as a whole, because you can then hope to find individual products like Seventh Generation or Method are a good starting point, for example. And I probably shouldn't have rattled off companies. I'm sorry. I hope that doesn't affect the recording. The point is that every single claim should be backed by some kind of proof mechanism, and that proof, the more we ask for it, the more obvious it will be, and the more shared it will be, and the more reputable it will be. So that's an incredibly positive thing for us to do. Are we sequestering oil in the form of plastics in our landfills for future generations? It is very hard to get oil out of plastic, so my answer to that at this point is no. That would be a marvelous transition. However, there are much better ways to sequester oil than turning them into plastics and dumping them in our landfills. And even that first usage is leaching toxins, and we shouldn't be using any more oil anyway. So that's pretty blunt, Tom, but I appreciate that question. That is thinking outside the box, which we do have to do. So those are the things that are in the chat. I'm going to stop there and actually what I meant to do, sorry about that, is go to my last slide, which has my contact information for questions. For some reason, Prezi's causing me trouble. They've updated, and I don't like what they've done. Oh, I really don't like what they've done. Let me scroll forward a little bit. I'm making you dizzy now. Okay, so here's my questions and my contact information. You can feel free to reach out to me at any time. And again, my point is to introduce these concepts. It's not to say I'm the expert in any way. What we need to do, again, is identify when it's a fib, identify when it's a misdirection, or identify when someone's just being lazy. We need to start to ask questions. We need to share, and we need to continue to be curious, because the entire system of materials is changing now and must change. So, additional questions, and I'm not sure how you want to handle it, Brendan. If you want me to share.
Let me see here. We had another example come in of kind of the unnecessary claim, and it's if you see something like gluten-free on eggs or on soda or something else that would never, has never contained gluten. And I think one of the other things I was thinking about while you were going through this is, you know, we always kind of like to bring things back to a hierarchy level of, you know, what's most preferred to what's, you know, least preferred or bad. And I think in this instance, when it comes to products, it's kind of the same type of thinking where, you know, you have to think, do I actually need the product? And that's the first question. And if you don't, then you don't need to purchase anything. But if you do decide that you need to purchase something, then you go into, okay, you know, what's the best version of that product? And that's where you can start to get into the claims and other things. And the other question I had for you was, are there any kind of certification programs or other things that you see that you think are very strong out there that people should be looking for when they're looking at different types of products?
Well, I would, you know, my brain is going to glitch on all of them, but I would suggest that we do call out several excellent third-party systems in the specifications that are on the Green New York website. So if you're not familiar with the product specifications that have already been developed, you should take a look at that. Especially, I know the challenge in the past year has been with cleaning products, with our learning more about COVID. There's been some back and forth about disinfectants. We are paying attention to, this is the other thing, we are paying attention to the performance of products and materials while we are achieving greater sustainability in those actual products and materials. And I think that's really important to also mention. But check those specs, because we cite several third-party systems in there that are reputable, and we're banking on in New York State because we find them reputable and to have the right facts.
Mm-hmm.
It is confusing. There are something like 600 different third-party rating systems for products out there.
Yeah, and with a lot of those too, with the third-party ratings, there's some of those that do come from kind of government agencies like WaterSense or Energy Star or USDA bio-based. You know, those, you can go to the federal government's website. You can see usually a list of products that are on there. So, you know, kind of the old adage of trust but verify. If it's something that you're concerned about, you can see if they're listed on there. And then a lot of them are also from kind of nonprofits and organizations that, you know, oversee them. So, for example, Eco Logo is by UL. There's the Green Seal standard as well that's used in a lot of the specifications. And if you go to their websites, the more reputable claims that are out there in third-party certs, they're going to have their criteria. Right on their website, they're going to have a list of the entities or the products that have met their specifications, so then you can kind of do that trust but verify process there too. So if you see something that looks a little weird, you know, it's got like 3 green leaves and not a lot, you've never seen it before, you know, it's worth just looking it up on the internet and seeing, you know, is this a reputable, you know, and there's some that, you know, are more stringent than others, where you can set kind of your own standard, where if you look at something and you think that's not good enough for what I'm looking for, then, you know, you can see if there's another standard out there or not.
Yeah, I would also say that, and I made the point earlier with a story that I shouldn't have told about a certain car manufacturer, but the point is that the companies that we're in a point of transition. We're going to be in transition forever. But I would say we're at a point with materials and products that the most reputable companies would not only just be focusing on their products, would also be focusing on their business processes, would also be focusing on their overall, greenhouse gas carbon footprint. So that's good to keep in mind. If all the focus is just on let's make our business greener, they're missing the point about their products and services. If all of the focus is on the products and services, they're probably pretty new to the industry and are still becoming reputable in that regard. And I think that's a lesson for all of us in state government as well. It's probably more clear to green the product line. It's easier for DASNY to point at a building and say that that's a lead project. It also has to be the business practices within the agency. We need to green that up, and our operations of the buildings that we touch within that agency in order to have the impact that we need.
Mm-hmm. So if anybody has any final thoughts or questions, you can type them into the chat box here. Any final thoughts, Jody?
Yeah, I just have one thing. I mentioned that things are in transition. Well, with the climate law in place, I just want to point out that we're not purely talking about energy anymore. We're talking about carbon. And we should start to use language that talks about carbon. As far as materials and products, we also need to talk about toxins. Absolutely. We also need to talk about resource management. All of these things. We need to start to transition our own language to talk about carbon and embodied carbon, or I like to say carbon burden in a product. We need to start reaching out for things like, as we, maybe as a purchaser of paper towels, you don't need to do this. But in the building industry, we need to reach out for environmental product declarations that really capture the carbon burden of that material in a way that touches on the process of mining, the process of refining, the process of producing, and what the end product is, the burden of the end product. So our language is currently in change mode, and I just wanted to bring that up because it might mean that the products we're reaching for will start to also pay attention to reporting their carbon burden. And I would encourage you to start asking about that. New York State has to reduce our carbon 85% by 2050 across all sectors of the state. So this has to affect everything from healthcare to education to manufacturing to transportation to the buildings we build.
Yeah. And with that, I want to thank everybody for jumping on today's webinar and taking the time. Again, if you are looking for more information on how to green your life, you can see recordings of previous webinars on the Green New York website. We also have a new Green Home Tips section there as well. The next webinar is going to be taking place in February, and that's going to be on sustainable brewing. So thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good one. Thanks, Jody.
Thanks.